A biblical perspective on life, culture and current events. This is 2020 on Vision.
This is Andrew McLennan. As the world's focus shifts from different events to different circumstances to different tragedies, it's easy to forget that there is still a war going on in the Ukraine between Russia and the Ukraine, and thousands of people are suffering, dying, being displaced, and it is an ongoing tragedy. One Australian ministry called Australian Lutheran World Service is still focused on the Ukraine, and one of the leaders, Michael Stolz, recently visited Poland to provide assistance and support. And it's our great pleasure to welcome Michael into the studios at Vision Radio today. Michael, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Andrew.
Michael, tell me what you saw when you went to Poland recently.
I visited a Lutheran church community. So they were well established. They used to run a deaconess school, and so they had lots of accommodation. So they were selected by our partners, Lutheran World Federation and the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugee, to be a community that would support displaced people coming out of Ukraine. So what I saw was, when I first went there, was a church just like you would see in Australia, with the hall. When I walked in there was ladies, just like a ladies' fellowship that you would see in Australia. The thing that struck me straight away that was different was they spoke to me, obviously, in the local language, Polish, which I didn't understand, and I didn't realise they were asking me, "Are you a refugee?" And I've never, ever, ever thought of myself as a refugee. And I didn't feel like I looked like a refugee or I was anything different. And that sort of struck me straight away, that the people there are just like us. But once I met them and started talking to them, you could see straight away that their stories were very different. The ladies that were there, they were singing a Ukrainian song that was rather mournful in its tone. And even though they'd come from all different parts of Ukraine and didn't know each other before, everyone knew this song because it was a song that was sung at weddings and funerals, and it had a sort of a sad tone to it about sort of farewelling people. But they sang that song with gusto. And then when they realised that I'd come from Australia and I was from the church in Australia, I went from being a refugee to royalty. They reached out to me generously. Go and get the pastor. He needs to come here and talk to you. And they looked after me like I was a king, and I felt very privileged. And so then they wanted to tell me their stories. They really did want to tell me their stories. And so I sat down and I listened to there's women. There were no men there. There were quite a number of children there. And this community has been there from day one. So firstly, there was a young lady her name was Katsia. She was the leader of the work that was being done there. She started off with a team of 20. And now, after the war, and immediately after the war, they were just providing emergency food, emergency shelter. Just everyone, the call went out to the community. Everyone was bringing stuff in to support, all hands on deck. But now,
and this is in Poland, isn't it?
This is in Poland.
So from the very beginning, Ukrainians were flooding across the border into Poland, were they, for refuge?
Yes. And the scale of it is just, I visited one community, but if you look at the scale of it, there's 8 million Ukrainian people registered as refugees in Europe, which is the population of New South Wales. So the scale of it is huge. And then within Ukraine itself, there's another 6.5 million people that are displaced, which is the population of Victoria. So the scale of it is huge. And the community I visited was just a small snapshot of that.
Yeah.
But the women there told me their stories about how they had to take refuge in bomb shelters and basements for days and days and days until they realised they had no choice, that they needed to get out of the country. And they brought with them their grandchildren or their children, and their husbands and their brothers and their sons are off fighting the war.
So this would have obviously had a big impact on you, just seeing the suffering firsthand. Can I ask, that's like you said, 14 million people are either displaced within the country, outside the country. As an Australian ministry, the Australian Lutheran World Services, did you just feel a little bit overwhelmed? Like, what can we do to help here?
Yeah, it's easy to feel overwhelmed, but I felt like, being a good neighbour, God calls you to where you are. And there are lots of Lutheran churches. And so the fact that these people are displaced, for whatever reason, we don't get caught up in the whys and wherefores of the war, but there's people in need and there's churches there. And so through our partners, Lutheran World Federation and UNHCR, they were selected to provide that support. As part of the care chain, what we do here in Australia is we raise awareness within churches and schools, and we fundraise, and then we have these partnership agreements and then we go and visit to make sure that what we're intending is actually occurring.
So what sort of support and assistance are you providing? You're obviously raising money here. So what are you on the ground giving people in these places of refuge?
So in this particular community I visited, they have supported 8,000 refugees over 2 years.
Man.
And what they're providing is a whole range of things. Firstly, there's emergency accommodation. So this community had the ability to provide that, or within their community they would outsource people, or eventually they would find them or help them find their own accommodation. So accommodation also originally just providing simple things like food. And then for those that weren't able to settle, then there were people that stayed within the community. So there was ongoing things such as language classes, teaching them how to teach Polish so that they could then find their own way and find some work, child support, counselling, psychological counselling. And the session that I was there, you had just like a ladies' fellowship. They were actually doing craft.
Yeah, which is great. And what's the reception like for them in Poland? Are the local people accepting the Ukrainians, or are they a bit tired of them, or you didn't really get a read on that when you were there?
I think the Polish people, because of their own history, have got a lot of empathy for the Ukrainian people. Out of all the nations in Europe, certainly the Poles have got a big heart for what's going on. Admittedly, after 2 years, it starts to tire.
Yeah.
But they've got a big heart, and there's still a lot of empathy and support for the people of Ukraine.
That's good. That's really encouraging. Are there a lot of Lutheran churches in Poland?
Not really. It's mainly a Catholic country, but in the south where I was, which is called Silesia, there are quite a number of Lutheran churches as a legacy from the German settlements that were there in previous century before the wars.
And what about Ukraine? Are there many Lutheran churches in the Ukraine?
No, there's not either. No. Okay. And that's part of our work is we go where people are in need. It just so happens in Poland, we're working through the Lutheran churches. In Ukraine, we're working in places like Kharkiv, where there's not really Lutheran churches, but we've gone to the communities and we've said to them, how can we help you? What's the best thing we can do? A lot of them are displaced, so they've assessed their apartments and said those that aren't written off that could be repaired, we're actively repairing their apartments. So last year we were involved in repairing 500 apartments in Kharkiv, which is in the northeast of Ukraine, and this year we're up to 50. We're targeting 1,550.
Wow!
And what it does is it gets people back into their homes, and you sort of think, is that the best thing we can do? But it costs a lot to support someone who's displaced. Yeah. It's very disruptive. Getting people back into their homes gives them back their dignity, gives them back their hope, and I spoke to the program manager. I spent quite a bit of time talking to him. He's an Irishman, Mark Mullen, and he told me some of the stories about what it was like to work in Kharkiv. There's still, even though the war has shifted more to the east and the south, in early days it was receiving a lot of missiles. They still are sending the occasional missiles through. So the very technology-savvy people, the Ukrainians, and they carry around their mobile phones and apps, and they sort of get warning, okay, missiles have been launched. We've picked it up even before the air raid warnings have gone off, and they know that it's time to go and get into the bomb shelter.
Wow.
So they're just quite a resilient people, go about their day-to-day life, rebuilding their lives, and then get interrupted periodically. They all take shelter in the bomb shelters and wait for it to pass.
Man, that's what I was going to ask. So obviously the conflict is dynamic. It's moved from where it once was to somewhere else now. So you're rebuilding these places of residence, and hopefully the war won't go back there. But what a great thing you guys are doing, Michael. I know you're probably involved in it and you're just aware of all the work and the numbers and that, but I just look at it as an outsider and go, that's amazing that you're raising money and you're rebuilding and helping to rebuild 1,500 dwellings for people who you've never met before and they've got no official connection to the Lutheran Church. Just for our listeners, Michael, who maybe are new to faith or new to Christianity, the Lutheran Church was started by Martin Luther, a very good German, back in about 1500 and something, I think it was. And it was what we call the Reformation, the Christian revival in Europe, and it spread all over Europe. And that's why I was curious to know if there were Lutheran churches in Poland or the Ukraine, because there are Lutheran churches all across Australia and America, and Scandinavia, I think, has got quite a few Lutheran churches. Well, obviously Germany. But yeah, that's where the Lutheran church comes from Germany, from Martin Luther. So what's the future hold, Michael? What do you guys got in the can, or what are you planning to do moving forward?
In Ukraine?
Yep.
I think we'll continue to listen to the needs of the people and respond. So the current program we're doing in Ukraine around getting people back into their apartments and refurbishing them has been well received, and we've tripled what we did last year. So I think while we continue to do that, we'll keep investing in doing that. And then within the churches outside of Ukraine that are hosting displaced people, we'll continue to support them as much as we can in practical ways and help them now sort of integrate as much as possible. I mean, I remember there was a lady there, Luba, who came and grabbed my hands, and she looked me in the eye and says, "Please say thank you to the people in Australia." And I sort of feel like I'm duty bound to pass that message on when I get the chance to talk.
Yeah.
And that they recognise, but she said, we've been really well looked after here. We're guests, but we really do want to go home when the war is over.
Yeah, that's so nice. I'm really encouraged, Michael, because I've actually never heard of you guys before. I've heard of the Lutheran Church, but the Australian Lutheran World Service, and just to know that there's Aussies like you just doing such a large amount of work over there and helping so many people, it's amazing. Now, you've got an event coming up on the 11th of May in Brisbane City. It's a 4-hour, great way to lose some weight if you want to lose some weight. It's a 4-hour walk. It's called Walk My Way Ukraine. And how far is that walk, Michael?
We've got 2 walks, so we've changed it up. There is a 12-kilometre walk.
Woohoo!
There's also a 3-kilometre walk.
Okay.
So we've got a hub, and we're being supported by the Ukrainian community. So there'll be Ukrainian dancing, and there'll be food stalls and things like that. So my father, who's 88, has signed up for the 3K walk.
Yep.
But my mum said, I'm not walking. So she's bringing a chair and she's sitting in the hub and enjoying the festivities. Everyone will be wearing blue shirts, Walk My Way, and caps for those who register. So we're expecting hundreds of people in blue walking that day. And
now, where does it start?
It's at the Goodwill Bridge on the QUT side.
Okay, the Goodwill Bridge on the QUT. That's the bridge that takes you to South Bank, correct?
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to come, Michael. I'm going to come and join that walk. I think what a great idea. And it's a fundraiser as well. So it's on the 11th of May in Brisbane at 1 p.m. kickoff on the QUT side of that footbridge that you walk across to get to South Bank. And it's called walkmywayukraine.org.au. That's walkmywayukraine.org.au. And just another way, these guys are raising money for the great work they're doing in the Ukraine. Michael, any final thoughts before we finish up today?
I just think that sometimes we feel so far away from this conflict, but we're really connected through humanity to everyone. And we're part of that whole care chain. We're part of being neighbours. And I think it's in the Australian DNA that we actually help each other out. And that's the way I see what we're doing. The actual event we're doing, it gives something practical that you can do. Sometimes people like doing something practical, and something that we can also create a sense of community at the same time. So I encourage people to enjoy and participate in that event.
Great. Well, we wish you all the best for the event, and anyone living in or near Brisbane, try and get along on the 11th of May, 1 p.m. on the QUT side of the footbridge that takes you to South Bank. It's called walkmywayukraine.org.au. Michael Stolz from the Australian Lutheran World Service. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks, Andrew.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.